this is Lauren from Daisy Cottage Designs, and I'm here with a video tutorial for you today for the blanket that you see on your screen. This blanket is a corner-to-corner blanket that is made using the mini bean stitch, so it's not used making the traditional corner-to-corner stitch that's used to make graphgans and things like that, but it's still a really fun stitch that produces a beautiful blanket with great horizontal stripes. No, not horizontal, diagonal stripes. Now this blanket is worked from corner to corner, like I said, but it's worked in two sections. So let me go ahead and show you. So in section 1, you are going to be crocheting a triangle. And each row is just going to make your triangle a little bit bigger. So you'll be working up this way and you'll be working over this way at the same time. And this is section 1. And when you get finished with section 1, it's going to look something like this. It's going to be a right triangle, and your rows are going to be worked this way on the diagonal, and you are probably going to notice just a little bit of flaring at the end of each row. Don't worry about that. It's going to happen, but when you finish, your blanket will be straight. So this is section 1, and you're going to be increasing on both sides. Each side is going to get longer. Now in section 2, we're going to need to finish the blanket and make it a square because we don't want a triangular blanket. So with each row, you're going to be working and you're going to be getting a little closer to finishing the square. Now as you go, your rows are going to be working this way. So you're decreasing in the sense that you're not getting any wider. And then when you finish, you'll finish up here in this corner and you'll have a complete square instead of a triangle. So this is section 2. So I'm not going to walk you through the whole blanket. That would take us a really long time. But what I am going to show you in this video is how to work section 1 and how to work section 2 and then how to finish at the very corner. Okay? Now it's really not difficult, but there's a couple of things that you're going to need to keep in mind, and that's making sure you're noticing where to place your hook on the stitches. And in order to do that, it's going to be really helpful to have a couple stitch markers. Now, if you don't have actual stitch markers lying around, safety pins work really well. And I actually prefer using these to a lot of stitch markers, especially when I'm making videos, because the pretty ones with the dangle just clank on my table. But these work well if you don't have anything else. And if you don't have safety pins handy, you can also use little bits of yarn. So as we go through, I will show you where I would put my stitch markers. All right, so for this pattern, I used Hobby Lobby. I love this yarn in 4 colors. I used the shades Glacier, White, Linen, and Rosy Cheeks. And I will list those names down below, and I will also put links to the pattern in the description. So the written pattern will be available there, so you know how many rows for each section and things like that. And I used a K-hook for this blanket. If you crochet really loosely, oh, and that's a 6.5 millimeter hook. So I used a K-hook. If you crochet really loosely, you're probably going to want to go down a hook. So to use a J-hook, which I believe is a 6 millimeter hook. And if you crochet really tightly, you're gonna want to stick with a K like I do. Okay, so the first thing that you're gonna do is you're going to chain 3 and go ahead and grab one of your 2 stitch markers and put it right around that chain 3. So you don't want to go into any of the stitches. You just want it to be surrounding that chain 3 and be able to move. So we're going to push that down towards our hook. And what we're going to do is we're going to work a mini bean stitch in this first chain. So let me show you how to do a mini bean stitch. So you're going to insert your hook into the chain and pull up a loop. There are going to be 2 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. There are 4 loops on your hook. Go ahead and pull through all 4 of those loops. Chain 2 and grab your other stitch marker and put it right around that chain 2. So again, it should be able to move. You don't want it in an actual chain. You just want it loosely around those stitches. Then turn your work, and we are going to be working into this chain 2 space over here, and we can pull this tighter, where our hook is. Now, when you're starting out, these first couple rows are really cramped, so this is when your stitch markers are going to be really important. And where the metal of your stitch marker is going through the stitch, that's where you want to insert your hook. So this is around that chain 2 space. So you're going to want to insert your hook under that chain 2. So right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to work a mini bean stitch, a chain 1, and another mini bean stitch into this chain 2 space. So right now we've got a lot going on because we've got our 2 safety pins, but it'll get easier the further we go, I promise. So insert your hook into that chain 2 space and pull up a loop. Yarn over and insert your hook into the same chain 1 space and pull up a loop. There are 4 loops on your hook. Pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And now I'm going to go ahead and take out my stitch marker. And we're going to work into that same space. So we're going to make another mini bean stitch. So we'll insert our hook into the stitch and pull up a loop. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. There are 4 loops on your hook. Pull through all 4 loops and pull everything tight. Now chain 2 and put your stitch marker around that chain 2. And now turn your work. And we made 2 mini bean stitches, and they're separated by a chain 1, and then we have a chain 2 at the end of our row. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to make a mini bean stitch into this chain 1 space. Now this leg right here that's right under my thumb, let me see if I can point to it with my pencil. This one right here might throw you off a little bit because it's hard to tell if it's a part of this mini bean stitch or if it's a part of this one. It's a part of the one on your right. So you're going to want to insert your hook to the left of that post. So here's the mini bean stitch. Here's that leg of the stitch. That's part of this one, not this one over here. So you're going to want to push that over to the side and insert your hook to the left of it and pull up a loop. Now yarn over and insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. And then chain 1. And now we have this chain 2. And you see we've got our stitch marker here so we know right where to work. And at the end of every row, we're going to work a mini bean stitch, a chain 1, and a mini bean stitch. So I said every row, but it's actually just every row in section 1. So let's do that together. So you can see where your stitch marker is. That's right where you're going to insert your hook. So insert your hook through there and pull up a loop. There are 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. There are 4 loops on your hook. Pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And now we're going to work our second mini bean stitch. So you're going to insert your hook into that space and pull up a loop. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same space and pull up a loop. And then pull through all 4 loops. And then remember to move your stitch marker. Now you're going to chain 2. And now move that stitch marker up. And then we're going to turn our work. And it's only on the first stitch of every row that you have to worry about this leg for some reason. But just make sure you're careful there. So make sure the leg is to the right. Insert your hook in that chain 1 space and pull up a loop. There are 2 loops on your hook. Now yarn over and insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. Pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And now you see here you have a chain 1 space. Right here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to work a mini bean stitch. You're going to insert your hook into the stitch and pull up a loop. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. Now pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And now we're to the end of our row because we have our stitch marker here. And remember, in the chain 2 space at the end of each row, we're going to work a mini bean stitch, a chain 1, and a mini bean stitch. So let's do that. We're going to insert our hook there with that stitch marker. We're going to pull up a loop. I'm going to go ahead and take out my stitch marker now. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. Pull through all 4 loops, chain 1, and we'll work another mini bean stitch. So we'll insert our hook into the stitch and pull up a loop. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop and pull through all 4 loops. And then chain 2. Okay, so we put our stitch marker around this chain 2 and now we're going to turn our work. And remember, the leg of this stitch goes to the right And you're going to insert your hook under that stitch and pull up a loop. Yarn over and insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. There are 4 loops on your hook. Pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And then the next 2 chain 1 spaces are going to be much easier to see. So we're going to mini bean stitch into this next chain 1 space and then chain 1. And then we're going to mini bean stitch into this next chain 1 space and then chain 1. And now we're at the end of the row where our stitch marker is. So we're going to work a mini bean stitch, a chain 1, and a mini bean stitch under this chain 2 space. I'm going to go ahead and take out my stitch marker because I know where to work. And by now you probably do too. So I'm going to insert my hook under that chain 2 space and pull up a loop. I'm going to yarn over and insert my hook into that same chain 2 space and pull up a loop. I'm going to pull through all 4 loops. I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to insert my hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. I'm going to yarn over and insert my hook into the same stitch and pull up another loop. And I'm going to pull through all 4 loops on my hook. Then I'm going to chain 2, and I'm going to go ahead and mark that stitch. At any point, if you feel like you know where these stitches are worked at the end of the row, you don't have to keep marking it, but it is just helpful in the beginning. So remember, the leg of this stitch goes to the right. We're going to insert our hook and pull up a loop. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. And pull through all 4 loops on your hook and then chain 1. And then we will work a mini bean stitch and a chain 1 into each chain 1 space. And then remember, into this chain 2 space at the end, we'll work a mini bean stitch, a chain 1, and a mini bean stitch. Let's go ahead and do that together. So we'll insert our hook into the stitch and pull up a loop. Yarn over and insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. There's 4 loops on your hook. Go ahead and pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. And we're going to do the same thing in this next stitch. So make a mini bean stitch and chain 1. And then we're going to do it in this next stitch. And chain 1. And then right here where chain 2 is, where that stitch marker is, we're going to insert our hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert again and pull up a loop, pull through all 4 loops, chain 1, and then work 1 more mini bean stitch, which is going to be insert your hook and pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook and pull up another loop, and pull through all 4 loops. And as you can see, we're working, right now we have a little tiny triangle. So we're going to chain 2 and mark it with our stitch marker or our safety pin. And then we're going to turn our work and we're going to mini bean stitch into each chain 1 space. And then into the chain 2 space at the end of the row, we're going to work a mini bean, and we're going to chain 1 and work 1 more mini bean stitch. Okay, so we're going to insert our hook into that first chain 1 space and pull up a loop. Yarn over, insert your hook into the same space and pull up another loop. Now pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. Work another mini bean stitch in the next chain 1 space and chain 1. And we'll do that all the way across. Until we get to that chain 2 at the end. Make sure you don't forget your chain 1. And then into the chain 2 at the end, we'll work a mini bean stitch. And then we'll chain 1. And we'll work another mini bean stitch. And then we'll chain 2. And we'll mark our stitch. Now, you could keep increasing as many rows as you wanted. And however many rows you make, you're going to need to make the same number of decrease rows. So right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. And so then we would need 7 rows to finish it. Now, I think I mentioned in the beginning, you might notice a little bit of flaring as you go, and that's going to even out as you finish. So this is going to be the end of our section 1. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to switch to section 2. Now, in the actual pattern, you would work a lot of rows of section 1. And remember, you're going to mini bean stitch and chain 1 in every chain 1 space. And then when you get to the chain 2 at the end of the row, you're going to mini bean stitch, chain 1, and mini bean stitch. That's all of section 1. Then when you switch to section 2, you're going to work how I'm going to show you now. All right? So for the first row of section 2, what you're going to do is you're going to skip the first chain 1 space. That space where we've had to push the leg over to the right, we're going to skip that one entirely. And we're going to work our first mini bean stitch into this chain 1 space. So not the first one, but the second chain 1 space. So we're going to insert our hook and pull up a loop, yarn over, insert our hook and pull up a loop, pull through all 3 loops, and then chain 1. And then we're going to do the same thing in the next stitch. So we'll work a mini bean stitch and then chain 1. And then we'll do the same thing in the next chain 1 space. Oops. And we'll chain 1. And we'll do the same thing until we get to the end of our row. And then we are only going to work 1 mini bean stitch into that chain 2 space. So in section 1, we were working a mini bean stitch, a chain 1, and a mini bean stitch. But in section 2, we're just working 1 mini bean stitch into the chain 2 at the end of each row. So now chain 2, replace your stitch marker. And we're going to do the same thing on this row. We're going to skip this first chain 1 space. We're going to work a mini bean stitch into the second chain 1 space and chain 1. Then we're going to work a mini bean stitch into the next one and chain 1. And we'll do that in every chain 1 space across. We'll work a mini bean stitch and then we'll chain 1. And we'll do that here. And I'll chain 1. And now I'm at the end of my row. So remember, in this chain 2 space, I'm just working 1 mini bean stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook into the stitch and pull up a loop, yarn over, insert my hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop, and pull through all 4 loops. All right, and now I'm going to chain 2, and I am going to mark my chain 2, turn my work. I'm going to skip this first chain 1 space in section 2, and I'm going to work into the second one, and I'm just going to work a mini bean stitch and a chain 1 into every chain 1 space. And then when I get to this chain 2 space at the end of the row, I am just going to work a mini bean stitch. I'm going to take out my stitch marker. I'm going to chain 2 and put my stitch marker around it. Oops, lost my chain 2 there. So I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to skip this first chain 1 space and go to the second one. And I'm going to work a mini bean stitch. I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to work a mini bean stitch in this next chain 1 space. And chain 1. And then when I get to this chain 2 space at the end, I am just going to work a mini bean stitch. And then I'm going to chain 2 and turn my work. And I am going to replace my stitch marker. And now I'm going to skip this first chain 1 space and I'm going to work into the next chain 1 space and make a mini bean stitch. Then I'm going to chain 1. And then I'm just going to work a mini bean stitch into the chain 2 space. Now we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And we can tell this is the last row because we just have one chain 1 space and the chain 2 space at the end. And we know we're supposed to skip the first chain 1 space. So after this, there won't be anything left to skip. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a mini bean stitch into this chain 2 space. So just work a mini bean stitch. So that's your, insert your hook, and let me walk you through it. So you're gonna insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch and pull up a loop. You're gonna chain 2 and then slip stitch to the same, into the same chain 2 space, and that will finish your square. All right, I hope this helps. Now, no matter what how big your project is, you're going to work the same number of rows in section 1 as you do in section 2, and you are going to work the very last row the same exact way, no matter how big your project was. So I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or send me a message on Etsy is probably the best place to reach me, and I will be happy to do what I can to help you. Have a great day and happy crocheting.